All right, let's try our Unit 3 review packet, Topic 8D, which is creating and solving a system of equations. In other words, this is word problems. So word problems are tough. You definitely need to read the word problem. I like to cross out unimportant stuff in my word problem because sometimes they get very wordy. So I have Mark and Arjun each improved their yards by planting hostas and ivy. They brought their supplies from the same store. Mark spent $36 on one hosta and 11 pots of ivy. Arjun spent $33 on 4 hostas and 7 pots of ivy. What is the cost of one hosta and the cost of 1 pot of ivy? I always like to look at the question when I have a word problem, because the question tells me basically, what don't I know? What am I looking for? And what I don't know is going to be my variables. So this is saying I don't know the cost of a hosta and the cost of 1 pot of ivy. That's my variables. It's always good to define your variables. You want to say x equals y equals. So x is going to be the cost of the hosta, and we're going to make y the cost of the ivy. So those are my 2 things I'm looking for. Cost of hosta, cost of ivy. This first part here, I don't really care about. I don't care about Mark and Arjun improving their yards. It's just extra words I don't need. I'm going to cross it out. They bought their supplies from the same store. Don't care. Gonna cross that out. This I care about. Mark spent $36 on 1 hosta and 11 pots of ivy. So that means that 1 hosta, the word and right here means plus. It means 1 hosta plus 11 pots of ivy costs $36. Well, 1 hosta. I know that the cost of the hostas is x, so I could replace hosta with x. I could replace ivy with y. So I have 1x plus 11y. I'm just going to cross it out so it makes it a little more clear. 1x plus 11y. Sorry. And it equals this, $36. Let's look at my next one. Arjun spent $33 on 4 hostas. Well, we're using x for hosta, so I'm going to cross off hosta and put x. And 7 pots of ivy. We're using y for ivy. I'm going to cross it off and put y. So this and, again, means plus. So this is saying 4x plus 7y, and the total cost is 33. So that's how I got my 2 equations. I crossed out the stuff that wasn't important. I found what my 2 variables were going to be by looking at the question. The question said, what is the cost of 1 hosta and the cost of 1 pot of ivy? So I know my variables are going to stand for the cost of the hostas and the cost of the ivy. And I just go sentence by sentence. So Mark bought 1 hosta, 1x, and 11 ivy, 11y for 36. Arjun spent 33, so total 33 on 4 hostas, or 4x, and 7 ivy, or 7y. So now I'm going to use substitution for this one. So I want to see which variable is easiest to get by itself. And I can see that this 1x is going to be the easiest one to get by itself, because all I have to do is subtract 11y from both sides, and it's by itself. I don't need to put the 1 in front of it. So now I see that I have an x here. X equals 36 minus 11y, so I can substitute. So I'm going to start by just taking out the x and leaving some empty parentheses there. So I am taking out the x, and I am substituting. I am replacing it with 36 minus 11y. And at this step, after you substitute, there should only be 1 variable left, right? The only variable left in this equation is y. I can't solve an equation if I have 2 variables in it. So I have 1 equation and 1 variable. Now I'm just doing my solving equation steps. So my first step is going to be to distribute. So I'm going to distribute the 4. Multiply the 4 by 36. Multiply the 4 by negative 11. I'm going to have to move up here. Now I'm going to combine like terms. These are my like terms. I have negative 44y plus 7y. That gives me negative 37y. And I still have the plus 144 equals 33. Now I'm going to subtract 144 from both sides. That I get negative 37y equals negative 111. And then lastly, I divide both sides by 37, or negative 37, which gives me y equals 3. Now again, this is asking for the cost of ivy, and when you have a word problem, you should actually put your answer in words. I should say the cost of the ivy equals $3. Now I still need the cost of the hosta, so I'm going to need to substitute back in. This will be my easiest one to substitute back in because this was a y value. So I'm going to go back and say, okay, x equals 36 minus 11 times 3. 36 minus 33 equals 3. So this is saying the cost of the hosta equals $3 as well. So they are both $3 each. And if you wanted to go back in and check your answer and make sure you got the right answer, a quick way to check it is by using your stow button. So I would do 3 stow x, 3 stow y, and plug your equation. And I have x plus 11y, and that should equal 36, and it does. And I have 4x plus 7y, and that should equal 33, and it does. So we know that we did it correctly. Let's try one more word problem, number 11. So again, let's read it first. Julio and Mary each improved their yards by planting grass and shrubs. They bought their supplies from the same store. Julio spent $240 on 12 square feet of grass sod and 12 shrubs. Mary spent $129 on 7 square feet of grass sod and 6 shrubs. Find the cost of 1 square foot of grass sod and the cost of 1 shrub. So again, here's my question. The question is telling me what my variables are going to stand for. I'm looking for the cost of 1 square foot of grass sod. So I'm going to say x is the cost of the grass sod. And I'm looking for the cost of 1 shrub. So we're going to say y is the cost of a shrub. So I've defined my variables. Now I'm going to go back and cross off the stuff that's unimportant. I don't really care that Julio and Mary are improving their yards. That's great, we don't care. They bought their supplies from the same store. Julio spent $240 on 12 square feet of grass sod and 12 shrubs. So again, just like last time, we said square feet of grass sod, that's x. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to cross it off and replace it with x. That and means plus. And lastly, shrubs, we said that's our y. So now I have 12x plus 12y. And what does it equal? Well, it equals what he spent. He spent $240, so it equals 240. We do the same thing with Mary. 7 square feet of grass sod. So we said grass sod is x. Let's replace that with x. We said and means plus. Let's replace that with plus. And we said shrubs are y. So now we have 7x plus 6y. And what does that equal? Well, it equals what she spent. She spent $129. There's my 2 equations. Now, I gotta find which one will be easier to solve for. Neither one looks particularly nice, except if you recognize in this first one that everything is divisible by 12. So I know I'm gonna have to do some division here, and this seems like when I do the division, I'm gonna end up with an integer answer, which might be nicer to work with. So I'm gonna solve this first one. And it doesn't matter what I solve it for. Let's solve it for x. So my first step would be to move the 12y over. So I would have 12x equals negative 12y plus 240. And then we're going to divide everything by 12. And that gives me x equals negative y. And then 240 divided by 12 gives me 20, plus 20. And this is a negative here. So now I can substitute that into my other equation. So this is an x here, and we know x equals negative y plus 20. So I'm going to take out the x. I'm just going to leave some blank parentheses for a minute. So again, I'm taking this x totally out, and I am replacing it with what it equals. It equals negative y plus 20. And make sure when you are substituting that you're substituting in the other equation, the equation that you didn't solve for a variable, right? This first equation, I wouldn't want to substitute back into that equation because that's the equation that equals this. This 12x plus 12y equals 240, that's the same thing. I don't want to plug the same thing back in there. So make sure you're using the other equation when you sub back in. And again, at this point, check and make sure you only have one variable. And if you do, then you're good to go in solving your equation. So my first step is distributing, which gives me negative 7y plus 140 plus 6y equals 192. Then we combine our like terms. That gives me negative y plus 140 equals 192. I'm going to subtract 140 from each side. That gives me negative y equals, let's see, 192 minus 140 is 52. I feel like I shouldn't have a negative here. I'm trying to figure out what I might have done wrong. I just realized where my mistake was. I copied the wrong thing down. I reversed my numbers. So I was doing problem 12 and I was wondering why I got a negative. And you guys should do this too. When you're doing problems, you should do a common sense check, right? And see, does your answer make sense? And the reason I knew I made a mistake is because my answer did not make sense. I'm not going to have a negative amount of money. So here's my mistake. Instead of writing 129 right here, I wrote it as 192. And that changed everything for me and gave me the wrong answer. So let's go back and fix that. So I have now 129, which is the right number, which means this is 129. This is 129. So now when I do 129 minus 140, it gives me negative 11. And when I divide both sides by negative 1, it gives me 11. And again, we said y is the cost of the shrub. So this is a word problem. I want to write my answer in words. The cost of the shrub is $11. Now I need to find my x. So I'm going to substitute back in. There's not really a particularly easy one to sub in. Well, actually, there's this one that I solved for. So let's sub it into here. So I have x equals negative 11 plus 20, or 9. So that means my x is the cost of the grass sod. So the cost of the grass sod is $9. So again, on this problem, you want to eliminate the not important stuff if it's confusing you with too many words. You want to look at the question. The question tells you what your variables are going to be. And then try to translate some of your words. Once you define your variables, when you see those words in there, you can cross them out and replace it with your variables. And as always, you should always be checking your answers to see if they make sense. So again, I wrote down the wrong thing at this step. I reversed my numbers and I wrote 192 instead of 129, and I got a negative answer, and that didn't make sense. So instead of continuing to go on with that, I figured out where my mistake was, and I stopped and looked through to find my mistake. So those are some things that you should be thinking about doing when you're working on stuff. Does it make sense? And if not, go back and try to find your mistake.